From the New Arts and Media Studios in River West, the greatest neighborhood in the world right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I'm Charles Purcell, and this is The Log. I did something today that I'd been putting off. Are you a procrastinator? Yeah, it's one of my many faults. I think it was, I don't remember the day, over a week ago, that I got a call from my sister-in-law telling me that our elderly aunt had taken a fall. Not recently, this was way back a couple 3 months ago. She's somebody I don't really keep in contact with. I see her at family reunions maybe once a year at best, this elderly aunt. So my sister-in-law tells me she's okay, but she did take a fall and she wasn't feeling great. And the last time they spoke, that would be my sister-in-law and my elderly aunt, when they spoke, the elderly aunt asked about me. How's he doing? What's he doing these days? I always just loved him so much. And, So my sister-in-law calls me and says, you really ought to give her a call. It would just make her so happy. And so I said, well, of course, I'll be very happy to give her a call. And I promised I would do that. But I knew, this is going to be a confessional today. I knew I didn't want to. That's the uncomfortable call. I'm going to call an elderly aunt who I don't really know that well. I don't know what we'll talk about. It brought back a phobia of my youth, which I thought I had defeated. And that is, I was phone phobic as a kid. I was just so fearful, especially of that obligatory call. Call your grandmother, thank her for the birthday card. Oh, just the worst. Absolute dread. And then even later, when I grew up and moved out of the house, calls to my own mother sometimes felt this way. What will we talk about? Irrational. Just all fear-based. But, what are you going to do? These are problems some of us face. I don't know if you relate to this. I loved my mother. I wanted to see how she was doing. I wanted to check in. But I'd think of calling her and then I'd find some reason not to. I'd find something else to do because I was just fearful of the experience. I had this irrational fear of an uncomfortable phone conversation, of uncomfortable silence, not knowing what to say. And so I didn't call. And then the next day, I didn't call. And then with every day that passed, now that's becoming an issue. I haven't called her in a month. I haven't called her in a month and a week. I haven't called her in 2 months. Now I really can't call because it's been so long. It becomes another reason to fear the exchange. Yeah. I just couldn't do it. So all of this comes back up to the surface because I haven't had to make an obligatory phone call in a very long time. In recent years, I call who I want, and if people want to call me, they call me, and it's usually just all right. It's just fine. But now my sister-in-law has put this back in my lap, an obligatory phone call. And so I didn't call. Came up with every excuse in the book. Oh, I forgot. It was impeachment week, and I really just didn't have a minute to spare. I had to watch every minute of the hearing, and then I had to talk with you guys here on the podcast, and I just came up with every little reason. Oh, maybe I'll call now. Oh, it's a little too late. She's elderly. She's probably in bed. And day after day after day, every day with that good intention. Today's the day I'll make the call. How ridiculous is this? Don't judge me. So the only way it happened was today when I was just sitting around doing nothing, which over the last week and a half, when I was fretting over this, there was plenty of moments like that. But in this particular moment of sitting around doing nothing, I just picked up my phone, boom, click, number, go, call. Just before I could talk myself out of it. phone rings. Hello? And I start to talk. Hello, Auntie, this is your nephew. And then I realize, because she keeps talking, oh, it's the voicemail. So I sit back and I listen to the voicemail, waiting for my turn to speak. And I hear two voices. I hear my aunt's voice twice. She's talking over the voicemail, and so she's there. Apparently, she has an old-fashioned answering machine. And some of you don't even know what this is. If you don't pick up in time, if the machine beats you to the punch, there's nothing much you can do about it. So she's now on the phone trying to figure out who's calling her. She's competing with her own outgoing message, which finally ends, and now it's the two of us. Okay, so hello. But there's a problem. Again, if you're not old enough to understand how this works, if you're on the phone while the answering machine is on, there's a loop. There's a feedback loop. This is crazy feedback loop between the phone receiver. And again, I have to explain. Phones used to have two elements. They'd have the earpiece and mouthpiece. So basically, she's got an open mic while she's recording. And if anybody knows anything about audio, feedback loop, problem. So she figures out who's calling her. We've got identities established, but we got all this feedback happening, this distortion happening. So she said, well, you're going to have to call me right back. Call me back. I said, okay, fine. I'll call you right back. So I hang up. I wait for a few seconds just to be sure that her answering machine has shut off automatically. Call again, and there we are. Now we're up and running. And so as for the conversation itself, it was slightly painful, but well worth it. She's an older lady, and she's a nice lady, and she was very happy to hear from me. And I mostly just listened to her talk. She just wanted to tell me all about her health and her health woes, and which was the reason I called. I was genuinely concerned. I mean, she's a nice old lady, so I was genuinely interested in how she was feeling and how she was doing. And there were definitely flashbacks to childhood. This is one of those phone calls. But I made it. So I feel good about myself. Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I did the bare minimum a week and a half after I should have. I did the bare minimum, but at least I did that. And she sounded pretty good. She sounded pretty happy that I had called, and I'm happy that I did, and I'm glad that it's over. Oh God, I have so many faults. Are you somebody who just has so many faults? I'm just a desperately insufficient at being a human being. Other people are so good at it too. They're so loving and so generous with their time, and boy, to call the elderly aunt would just be something they do on a dime. And I don't know. I also, speaking of being a terrible person, this is a day of true confessions. I took great joy in hearing that my cousin, her son, was divorced and lonely. I never liked the guy. He was really obnoxious as a kid, and we were forced to be playmates at every family get-together. We were the exact same age, so it was just expected that we would entertain each other, and I always just hated him. And then when he grew up, we parted ways. I never saw him again, but I would hear through the grapevine or through talking to my aunt or others the news of my cousin. And he just had all sorts of success. He became this very successful architect, and he built this massive house for himself down in Santa Fe, I think it was. And he's a big golfer, and he's got kids, and always with that kind of news. Just living the big life. And I got the very clear impression that he was a real conservative guy politically, had a whole damn lot of money and enjoyed spending it. And I just never gave him a single thought, except at these little family reunions where I'd hear about him. I haven't seen him now since we were, I don't know, 15 years old. But every couple of years, I'd hear his name and I'd hear the updates. And I think, God, I hate that guy. So to hear that he's divorced and that my aunt is worried about him and really wishes he would find a nice lady, maybe just it gave me joy. I know, right? I'm a terrible person. I'm a terrible person, and so are you probably. I hope so. Do you relate to any of this? Do you have these kind of faults? Yeah, these daily revelations that I seem to be having, learning over time what an inferior person I am has really been difficult to accept, but at the same time, probably good that I'm learning these things. I'm getting some more self-awareness in my ripe old age. So I just wonder where it's going to go next year. I mean, maybe you relate to this. There's a classic personality type, somebody who loves humankind but can't stand people. I think that's not so uncommon, right? That's definitely where I am. Very, very impatient with most people. And much more interested in everyone in the aggregate. About humankind. About the fate of the planet. As Jesse Jackson once put it, I'm a tree shaker, not a jelly maker. I like to wrestle with big ideas. I like to rant and rave about the way things ought to be. But just to really get down in the trenches and live life with my fellow humans, yeah, that's hard sometimes. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a bad person like the Orange Menace is a bad person. I'm just sort of flawed. I'm a little neurotic in a negative sense. There's the charming neurotic of the Woody Allen character. Not Woody Allen the person. Let's not get into that. But, you know, the funny, charming neurotic who we love to just hang out with or at least watch as an entertainment. I also related to Charlie Brown in the comics. And I remember when I was a kid telling that to my mother. I said, I really relate to Charlie Brown. I feel like I'm a Charlie Brown. And she was just aghast. She was so disappointed to hear that. How can you say that? Because to her, Charlie Brown was just a loser. He was the odd man out. He got no Valentines on Valentine's Day. He lost the ball game every time. He was the butt of other people's jokes. But I didn't see Charlie Brown that way at all. No, I saw him as the everyman struggling. He was Sisyphus to me. Just always trying to find meaning in a world filled with obstacles, including his fellow Peanuts characters, who were, most of them, just really mean to him or indifferent, except for the occasional philosophical conversation with Linus, with their elbows on the brick wall, their chins in their hand. Oh, he tried so hard to be a good big brother to Sally, and she just cut him off at the knees. So as a young kid, I had already started developing this idea, this mistaken idea, this character flaw in me was developing, that other people didn't think as deeply as I did. They didn't get it. They were just my foils. They were my Lucy and Linus and Sally. I was Charlie Brown. I was the sensitive thinker, trying to find true love, true happiness, true meaning, while everyone else just lived on the surface. But allowing those thoughts and those feelings to develop over time made me the deeply flawed person you see today. The person who has anxiety, even dread, about calling an elderly aunt because I might be uncomfortable. And because she might drone on about her rich son and all of her medical procedures. And I sit here in judgment. Yeah, this is true confession today. And I'm really curious. I'm wondering if you relate to any of this, if you share any of my faults. Now, I don't want to go overboard in self-flagellation here. That definitely has kind of a narcissistic quality in and of itself. Oh, I'm such a bad person, and I'm so self-aware. There's a real catch-22 going on here. Yeah, just listen how self-aware I am. Listen to how cognizant I am of my own faults and my own psyche. Aren't I special? Oh, man. Speaking of phone conversations, I recently had a nice long conversation with my other sister. I always talk about my sisters. I have 4 sisters. 3 of them I converse with regularly. One of them I never talk with at all. She and I just are on 2 different planets. And I wish her no ill, but we just got nothing in common. It's very difficult to have any kind of relationship with her. But my other 3 sisters, we have long conversations. So I talked with one of them the other day. And it was a good example. Just a very smart person, lots to offer, just interesting insights. We have the regular family conversation, how are the kids and that sort of thing, but also about current events and politics and religion. She was raised very religiously. She's a few years older than I was. So by the time I came around, my parents had a little different attitude. They were a little more hands-off by the time I came around. They were tired. So I had a lot of freedom as a kid. But she grew up in a very strict religious household. And that was sort of embedded in her. So she has very deep feelings about the Catholic Church. And so we talk about that. She has a strictly conservative, very politically conservative Catholic, what do they call it? I've forgotten now. Who's the head of a Catholic church, a Catholic parish? Oh, pastor, right? Is it the pastor? Boy, I've been away too long. I forgot the terminology. But anyway, she was very active in the church for years and years, and just on every committee and church every Sunday and meetings a couple nights a week, and just very involved. But she finally had to quit her church because he and the great majority of the flock are radically conservative. And she's a good sort of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi Catholic. She's a liberal Catholic, which was a great influence for me. I went to Catholic school, but one of the big influences for me was, it must have been 5th or 6th grade. We had this small group of Jesuit priests come to speak to all the classes at my little Catholic school at St. Peter's in East Troy, Wisconsin. And these Jesuits had spent years in Central America. And I know Catholic priests in Central America sounds bad. But what I got from these guys was a very liberal, very progressive point of view. They taught us in those talks about the concept of liberation theology, where the whole goal is to liberate people. They weren't at all interested in being missionaries in the old-fashioned sense of the word. No, this was something new. This is something I'd never heard of as a young kid. And it just blew me away. It was all about social justice. It was all about empowering these poor people who are oppressed by both poverty and by their political circumstances. And I thought, man, that is damn cool. And so from that day forward, whenever I thought about myself as a Catholic, that's how I wanted to define myself. I'm not that guy up in the pulpit droning on about communism and birth control. No, I relate with these community organizers, helping to empower oppressed people. How great is that? So that strain of Catholicism exists in the world. Now, it was just a couple years after that experience that I definitely strayed. I started listening to the actual words that were being chanted in Mass. And I really listened to what the nuns and the priests were telling me. And I was pretty quick to bolt. I hung around a little while longer because I really enjoyed the guitar masses. I enjoyed choir practice, and I enjoyed singing on Sundays. So I stuck around a little longer than I might have. But by the time I was halfway through high school, I was halfway out of the church. And by the time I graduated high school, it was completely in my rearview mirror. But I never forgot those really great Jesuits who taught me about liberation theology, taught me about social justice. Probably the first time I'd ever heard those words. So that's my sister. She's a liberal, progressive, social justice Catholic. There's still a few of them out there. So That was my conversation with my sister. And I think in that conversation, and now in the conversation I'm having right now with you, it's a good lesson I need to learn every day. You know how the most important lessons, you have to keep relearning them and relearning them and relearning them? Well, the lesson I have to keep relearning is that people have so much to offer, and I have so much to benefit from them. I'm not just Charlie Brown. I'm not just the straight man who's taking the brunt of everyone else's thoughtlessness and callousness. There was a sitcom many years ago. If you're old enough, you'll remember Bob Newhart. He was a psychologist, right? But the series after that, or a couple series after that, was called Newhart, and that's where he owned and operated an historic inn in Vermont, if you remember this. And it was the classic setup. He was the straight man. Every character around him was in one way or another kind of nuts. And they got all the laughs. And Bob Newhart, the character he played, was that central character around which everything else revolved. He was the Charlie Brown. He was the one who kept getting beat up by the antics of everyone around him. Classic motif. But that's not real life. It's a setup for fiction. It's a conceit. But in real life, everybody has their moments. Each and every one of us, I guess, can feel the odd man out, can play the role of the jokester, the trickster, can be the clueless one, can be the thoughtless one, the bad guy, the hero. We all have our moments. And I'm trying to not only learn this lesson, but trying to internalize it so I don't have to learn it over and over and over again. Because to feel like you're at the center of all this, to feel like you're Charlie Brown or you're Bob Newhart, there is a narcissism to that. As much as I try so hard to convince myself that I want only the best for the world. Again, I love humankind. It's people that drive me nuts. Unless and until I really understand the value of each individual person, what they bring to the world, what they bring to me, what I can give to them, I need to take myself out of the center of my world perception and put myself out into the group. Be a real part of that group. Not an observer, not a judge that sits on high, or a foil that takes their abuse. No. One of many. E pluribus dem unum. I pause here to think that among my listeners today, there might be several people just sort of chuckling to themselves. Oh, isn't he adorable? These great insights. Yeah, I remember when I went through that phase. I have that same feeling when I hear, especially white men, you know, my particular tribe, and especially when they're going through phases that I've gone through before. They're finding some spiritual awakening. They're finding some political awakening. And they're so eager to share their personal experience and the lessons they're learning, and to present them in a way that appear more like teaching than learning. In other words, it's not what I've learned, it's more what I have discovered and now I have to teach. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're older, or if you've already been through that experience, through that particular phase of life, you look at it with sort of mixed feelings. Most of it's positive. You think, okay, good. That person is discovering something that needed discovering. Very good. And you smile and you think to yourself, good job. Congratulations. Another part of me feels a little, I don't know, I can't help being a little condescending about it. It's like, oh man, they think they're so wise. Just wait. The person's in their late 20s. Wait till they go through their 30s and 40s. They have so much more to learn. And they really think they've got it all figured out. And isn't that kind of comical? And as you get older, if you're in your 20s, you feel this way about teenagers. When you're in your 30s, you feel that way about people in their 20s. And then you get into your 40s, 50s, or 60s, then everybody coming along on the road behind you, making the same discoveries that you've made along the way. And if they get all full of themselves and preachy about it, it's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, okay, just wait. You're so adorable. Even somebody like, who's the columnist from the New York Times? David Brooks. David Brooks, an interesting example here. A couple of years ago, he went through this, one of these sort of moments of discovery. I don't know, kind of a midlife crisis. And in his columns and in his commentary, he kept going back to it, all the great lessons that he's learned about how it really is about self-awareness. And I don't know how old he is. I think we're about the same age. Maybe I'm a little bit older. But when you're somebody like David Brooks, you have this national audience. You've got a column in the New York Times. He wrote an entire book about his personal discovery, finding that the rat race of competition in politics wasn't the be-all and end-all of life, that there was a spiritual component. No kidding. And he presents it in a way that he kind of has this notion that he's the first person to discover this. And he feels compelled to tell the rest of us. So, I mean, it's great. Everybody has to go through their journey. It's wonderful. It's what life's all about. But when we share our journeys, we risk sounding ridiculous. And especially if we put ourselves forward as some sort of guru, that we have some sort of special knowledge that we need to share. So I take the opportunity today to talk about my journey a little bit, hoping that I don't know. I was hoping you might relate. I guess I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm hoping it might help you to see your journey in a way. Because for all of my faults, and that's where this whole thing started, of all of my faults, which I have many, the one thing that's remained consistent ever since I was that little kid at St. Peter's, listening to the Jesuits, I really do genuinely want you to do well. I genuinely want the best for everybody. I really do. It's kind of at the center of everything else. Except for my cousin. I took glee in his divorce and loneliness. Oh, life is weird, isn't it? All right. Well, this was an unusual episode. We don't normally do this. I don't know if it's going to happen again. It's a podcast. I can do whatever the hell I want, right? So I may very well regret posting this particular episode. I'm quite sure I will. And I'm quite sure that when I listen to it 5 years or 10 years from now, I'll just shake my head in bemusement. It's like, oh, I remember feeling like that. Isn't he adorable? We all think we're so wise. All right. Well, let's talk again tomorrow. And I'm guessing I can say with a good deal of certainty that we'll get back to news and politics and all that sort of thing. All right, there you go. I do love you. I'm Charles Purcell.